cases like Kevin Strickland's are delegitimizing events in the system. And that can't be undone. That part can't be undone. But what could be done today is that he were released.
Kevin Strickland has been in prison for a 1978 triple murder in Kansas City.
Today, my job is to apologize.
Today, Jackson County prosecutor Gene Peters Baker says he's an innocent man.
It is important to recognize when the system has made wrongs.
Mr. Strickland has been incarcerated for over 40 years for a crime he didn't commit. In 1979, he was convicted of a triple homicide in Kansas City, Missouri, where 3 individuals were killed and a 4th person was injured but survived. Mr. Strickland was at home that night. He had an alibi. He was on the phone. He was just 18 years old. When police arrived, the surviving victim did not name him, even though she knew him. She named 2 other individuals and said she couldn't identify the other 2 and gave a description. Unfortunately, in what we now know as a tainted identification, a friend later came to her and said, well, that description you gave, that could be Kevin Strickland, right? And that sort of tainted her memory, and she started to ask about that, and eventually she identified Kevin Strickland. And that was essentially the case against him.
There's no physical evidence linking Mr. Strickland to the crime. The whole case was built around and really required the testimony of Cynthia Douglas. When you look at the facts and you get to know what happened in the case, really, I think the bigger story is about the unreliability of that testimony. Even back in 1978, it had literally every indicator of unreliability. First time he was tried, it resulted in a hung jury. There was 1 African-American juror on that jury.
After that trial, the prosecutor went to the defense attorney and said, that's a mistake I'll never make again. And he ensured that was true. So at the second trial, when it came time to select the jury, the prosecutor used all of his first peremptory strikes to strike all of the remaining Black jurors from the pool. And as a result, that second jury, which ultimately convicted Mr. Strickland, was an all-white jury. And just 3 months later, his co-defendant, Vincent Bell, who is one of the individuals the victim named as one of the perpetrators, at his plea hearing had to give a description under oath of what had happened. And he described in detail what happened that night of the crime, naming all of the other 3 individuals who committed the crime with him, and saying very clearly that Kevin Strickland was not involved and that Kevin Strickland was innocent.
Nobody did anything after that. Nobody did anything except Mr. Strickland, who had, at that point, no resources to do it. So really, almost every part of the system failed him.
Now at 6, new allies and a potential new law could help overturn the conviction of a man who has sat in prison for decades.
Kevin Strickland. His story has gained a lot of attention in the last week.
In 2009, that surviving victim, Cynthia Douglas, contacted the Midwest Innocence Project in an email saying that she thought that there had been a wrongful conviction and she may have participated in that and wanted to contact someone to recant her identification. Tasked with that in hand, looking for new information, we saw that there was a fingerprint that had been sort of found on what they said was the murder weapon that they said wasn't comparable at the time. We contacted the prosecutor's office at that time to say, we think you should take a look at this case, and also can we retest this fingerprint? They said yes to both. They retested the fingerprint. They found that fingerprint excluded Mr. Strickland as the source, and they ultimately came to the undeniable conclusion that Mr. Strickland is innocent.
This one's really clear, in my estimation. The reason for that is it's not a case that my office would carry today, and it's not a case that my office would have carried for a whole bunch of years now. A single eyewitness ID is not enough. So we need other evidence, to help tell that story. He needs someone to fight for him. He's had fighters outside of the system. He needs a fighter inside the system to fight for him.
So currently in Missouri, there is no way for a prosecutor to overturn someone's conviction, even if they know that it is wrong. And I think that that's what is just so shocking for all of us, that we all know what the result has to be. There is no other just result that is not Mr. Strickland coming home, but we also don't know when it will be. by the mechanisms available to Mr. Strickland, it's certainly not going to be tomorrow.
What does justice look like? That's a tough one. I mean, I don't know. I haven't seen it yet.
Earlier this year, a bill was passed that included a provision that would allow a prosecutor to file a motion for a new trial and do exactly what we're talking about for Mr. Strickland, right? Unfortunately, that bill has yet to be signed by the governor. And more importantly, even once it's signed, that bill will not go into effect until August 28th. So again, while everyone knows that Mr. Strickland is innocent, while the prosecuting office knows that he's innocent, agrees that he needs to be released immediately, that office will not have the power to do so until at the earliest August 28th. He has always been telling the truth for 43 years, and no one has ever heard him. And I think while he's not yet exonerated, it's incredibly important and meaningful to him and to all of us that people know that he is innocent and that there is an innocent person still sitting there and that he matters.